Welcome to Wild Take Wednesdays. Right here on UNC'S Corner, I am your host Unc. If you're watching this, on YouTube, welcome. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video. If you're watching this on TikTok, like the live. How you guys doing? I hope everyone is well. Yeah. This is Wild Take Wednesdays. Today we will be discussing Diaspora by Maglera Doe, aka I wrote here the Porpoise Poet. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. So yeah, welcome to Wild Take Wednesdays. We're gonna be breaking down this album. If you haven't listened to the album, I'm sorry. You probably may have the opportunity to listen to the album after this, but yeah, welcome to Wild Take Wednesdays. I am your host Tato, aka Unc. Like I said, if you're watching on YouTube, like, share, subscribe. If you're watching on TikTok, like and share. Welcome to Wild Take Wednesdays. We're gonna be breaking down Diaspora by Maglera Doe, and we are on 5,000 likes. All right, cool. Without wasting too much time, we're gonna go into it. Like I said, we are breaking down Diaspora by Maglera Doe. It dropped 2022. Wild Take Wednesdays, we are here. What's going on, Zoo? It dropped 2022. I can't remember when in 2022, but it dropped 2022. This is Maglera Doe's debut album, On the Throne, Kulichana's label, I believe. And this was what's going on, digital format. This was him essentially, coming into the game with his first album, and we'll be breaking it down. It is one of my favorite albums out here. And yeah, I just want to give a big shout out to everybody that's here. Zoo, digital format. TJ's in the cut like peroxide. I saw Mobile somewhere here. Psychic is somewhere here. Big shout out to everybody that's here, that's watching. It's a long time coming. We had the Fiber Wars, but we are most definitely here. Big shout out to Palace. I know Palace is in the. There is no Twitch, Zoo. There is no Twitch. There is no Twitch because I started playing music. What's going on? Big shout out to Pepper HD. Also, there is no Twitch. We'll bring back Twitch once we are 100% okay. But yeah, we are just on TikTok for tonight, and obviously on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. Anyway. We're gonna start. For those who don't know, Diaspora is a 12 track album. 12 track album. Also, like I said, dropped 2012, right? By Maglera Doe. For those who don't know Maglera, there's no way that people don't know Maglera Doe. Now, I know some of you guys know him from his verse on Never Ride Eme Bar. Some of you guys know him from the KO feature also. Not 2012, sorry, 2022. Sorry. Not 2012, 2022. What's going on, Casanova? I know a bunch of y'all know him on the features, right? But today or tonight we're gonna break down his album Diaspora, his debut album Diaspora. For those who don't know what Diaspora is a location that you are put at when you are forcefully removed from your homeland. So like America would be a diaspora for black people who got taken away from here, right, in Africa. And then obviously for us, Maglera Doe kind of breaks down the idea of diaspora in relation to us as people in South Africa, black people in South Africa. We're gonna go to the first song. Memoirs. I write these demons for my soul, or these memoirs for my soul. Right, I played that earlier on. We're gonna go. Thank you very much. We're gonna go into the first song, Memoirs. Right, I'm gonna start by saying I'm gonna give two perspectives here. Right, the first perspective is the perspective that I had back in 2022 when the album dropped. And then I'm going to give a perspective that I have right now, 2025, listening to it, after 3 years as a grown-ass man. Not to say I wasn't a grown-ass man then, but there's a lot of perspective that I got. You understand? I think 2022, I was like 30 years old, and now I'm 32, turning 33. So within those 3 years, there's a lot that I've gained, a lot of perspective that I've gained, a lot of growth that I've gained, and most definitely, I understand a lot of things. Now, when we go to Memoirs, when it first came out, I didn't like it. Right, I didn't like Memoirs largely because I mean, right, we coming from Bodega, we coming from a bunch of features, right? I think it's he had a feature with SPK in them on a song by Hype, and yeah, like we listen. You Super Saiyan Tanga Broly, like we come from that, like from two player, we come from that type of Maglera. So when I hear Memoirs, right, back in 2022, I didn't like it because I'm just like, this is not strong enough of a single, right? Because it was also highly anticipated. You understand? But when I heard it in like within the album, within the sequencing of the album, it opening up the album Diaspora, right? It started to make sense, right? I mean, like I said here, like it sets. I say here on thingy on my notes, I say it's a great way to set the scene, right, of the destitute diaspora we find ourselves in. You understand? And when you watch the music video, right, the music video is, it kind of breaks down. Like if you grew up in a township, especially a mining township, right, the infrastructure, right, body hostel, the small matchbox houses. You understand? Matchbox houses, right? You see this. You see this in the music video, like the darkness, the way it was graded. You see this in the music video, and like I say, it opens up, right, the narrative of the destitute nature of the diaspora we find ourselves in, right? Again, right, we are in a diasporic situation in as far as townships because of where we come from. Like we don't come from townships, right? Townships are like camps that were created for us. We more so come from rich lands, you understand, rich homelands, that is, and rich in minerals, rich in land, right, rich in the possibility of growth in as far as the land, right. We come from places that essentially served us, right. Nature served us, the ground served us, the land served us, the homeland served us. And with everything that happened, right, within like the apartheid situlala, what you find is we get removed from these places, right? And in us getting removed from these places, we're being put in these other spaces called townships, and these townships essentially give us, the essence of being in a diaspora, because we do not essentially belong here, right? We belong in different places. We belong in the homelands, emakaya, right? You find people like myself and other people who don't even have emakaya, right? We were born in Johannesburg, and right, we became essentially children of this diasporic situation called the township, right? So with Memoirs, he goes into that, and he essentially opens up. It's a great way to open up the album, given the fact that the album is based on the diaspora, right, which is the townships. We go into the second song, Dor do Povo, right? Phenomenal song, by the way. One of my favorite songs in the album. Dor do Povo stands for the people's pain, right? And on Dor do Povo, he essentially gives you an expansion of the people's pain, right? An expansion of what being displaced looks like, what being displaced does to you. You understand? Like, he gives you this whole, I want to say, a dissertation as to what happens when you are removed, when you are forcefully removed from your homeland. You understand? You go through spaces of pain. You go through spaces of displacement. You don't know what to do. You understand? You don't know what to do, right? You try to find life in this lifeless place, right, that you find yourself in due to the government. You know what I'm saying? And on Dor do Povo, he goes and paints this beautiful picture with the brother. I forgot the brother's name now, that he features on the song, right, who does the hook. And he does the hook so beautifully, right, like the, Dor do Povo lam chigi chigi, like the way that he sings it. I remember the first time when I listened to Dor do Povo, I was like, this is such a beautiful song, right? I didn't know what Dor do Povo stood for at the time. Obviously, I did my research and I realized, I believe it's Portuguese, right, for the people's pain. So the second song, right, from Memoirs, right, goes into the expansion of pain, right, of being displaced from our homelands to these diasporic townships, right? From just based off of the first two songs, right, I'm just like, At the time when I listened to it, I was obviously enamored. Like, I'm a Maglera Doe fan. But now, as I listen to it, right, one thing that made me a fan of Maglera Doe and that reminded me why I'm a fan of Maglera Doe is the sociological aspect that his music has. You understand? Especially on this album. A lot of people say Maglera Doe is always one-dimensional, right? He always makes these culture references. He always makes references of his past life, the Kasi. But I think what people do not recognize is that just like Pretty Ugly, just like I said about Pretty Ugly, the last Wild Take Wednesdays, right? These guys are hood reporters, right? And I said on the Pretty Ugly Wild Take Wednesdays, I said Maglera Doe is Bodie from The Wire, right? He is a person with integrity. You understand? He is a person that partook in some of the ills of the hood, right? He just made it out. And in him making it out, he can give you a great display or a great narrative as to why things like these happen, or things like this happen, or the things that happen in the hood happen, right? So on Dor tu Povo, he breaks it down, right? But he doesn't break it down in the way that a normal rapper would. Like, oh, the system this, the system that. He's a reformed hood nigga, yes, Zoo. Right? He doesn't do it that way. He actually goes into the emotional and psychological side of things. You understand? Like, oh, let me explain to you why we do what we do. And doesn't show you from a, oh, brothers is poor, brothers don't have much perspective, but goes from a, oh no, we are displaced as a people. And because we are displaced as a people, we are processing that pain. You understand? And here's how we process that pain. And he goes into it on this album, right? So by him going memoirs, right, opening up that, oh, listen, we are here. You understand? We're in the diaspora and we are in pain. So the first two songs open you up to that idea. You understand? He gives you an insider perspective. Yes, Z. You understand? And then we go into the third song, Glacier. Right? Glacier is so deep as a song, right? Glacier is so deep as a song because what Maglera does for the first time on this album, which is something that I like talking about, right? I like talking about two things when it comes to rappers, and I always mention this when it comes to rappers like Doomy, rappers like Pretty Ugly, rappers like Ginger Trail, right? To a certain extent, rappers like Tyson Sabateli, you understand? Just rappers, writers, proper writers, right? He gives you two things. He gives you, right, the juxtaposition of our life, and then he gives you the vices of the righteous, what I call the vices of the righteous. On Glacier, I say he starts off with flex culture, or it's a flex thingy on culture. You understand? Whatever culture, right? Whether it be hood culture, whether it be Greco-Roman culture, whether it be Italian culture, whether it be Shakespearean culture, whatever the culture, right? Whatever you think culture is, he really flexes on that. He shows you that I'm just not another hood nigga. I'm really tapped in, right, from my culture and cultures around me. I say here, it paints the life of a young black man and the environment they find themselves in a Shakespearean or Greco-Roman tragedy. When you listen to Glacier, even the production, right, the production is so classical driven, right, violins, right, it's string heavy, you understand, when you listen to Glacier, obviously on the bed of 808s. You understand? But I say here that it paints the life of a young black man and the environment that they find themselves in as a Shakespearean or Greco-Roman tragedy. Things Victorian also, yes, GR. Things like, so when you listen to Glacier, right, you will liken it to things like Othello, right? When you listen to Glacier, you will liken it to, you know, Macbeth. You understand? So, like, plays like that, that's what the song is giving to me, that is, right? This is my opinion, of course, but I think this is what he's trying to do, and he's walking you through this pain, walking you through these trials and tribulations that we find ourselves in this diasporic land, or this diasporic structure that is the township, right? And the production does this well, like as a backdrop, right? But also the juxtaposition part of it is that life is so cold, like the jewelry I wear. Right, when you read Decoded by Jay-Z, there's a part where he talks about when he was doing his MTV Unplugged, right, he had a Che Guevara shirt, right, with a Jesus piece on top of it. And if you guys know about Che Guevara was, you know, a leader, a communist leader in Cuba, and then this man had a capitalistic is chain, not chain, but what I'm trying to say is figure. You understand? Like the the thingy, the chain, the Jesus piece on Jay-Z, right on top of Che Guevara's face, was a juxtaposition of communism and capitalism. You understand? And when you read Decode It, there's a part where Jay-Z talks about this when he was doing, I think, his 2001 MTV Unplugged. Glacier does the exact same thing, right? This life is as cold as the jewelry I wear. You understand? Glacier. And when he goes into it, when you listen to the second verse, he also talks about, the women, what the women want, right? The women want to, they want to have the jewelry, they want to shine. I want to shine also, right? I want to have a glacier on me to show you that I'm out here. But at the same time, this glacier also represents the coldness, right, that I go through. The coldness that I go through within, again, this diasporic system that I find myself in, which is the township, right? So when you listen to Glacier is a flex on culture, because he's taking hood culture, he's taking consumerism culture, right? He's taking what people will see as global culture, and he's bringing them together. You understand? He's bringing them together, right? And then he puts them together, and then he gives it to you. Why? Because he's showing you within this pain that we find ourselves in, the people's pain, dor do povo, within this pain that we find ourselves in, and this environment that I mentioned, right, there by Memoirs, we still have hopes and dreams, right? We still want nice things for ourselves. So what I want is a glacier. Many of y'all know who watch Wild Take Wednesdays that I come on here with gold watches, but I still live in the hood, right? I come on like anybody else. Niggas want to flex. Niggas in the hood, you see somebody driving a 3255, a Golf 7, but niggas still live in the hood. They come from a Matchbox house. You ask yourself, why would you do that? Because life is so cold, but we still got to show that we can be colder, because this thing won't take us away from what we are trying to achieve. Even though these things financially may cripple us, these things are tokens of our ambition. So Glacier goes into that, and the music, obviously, like I said, puts it in this space where it's like Victorian, Shakespearean, Greco-Roman-esque tragedy, We go into the fourth song, Ascension, right? Personally, back in 2022, I didn't like Ascension at all. I didn't like Ascension. I thought Ascension was a filler. I thought Ascension was just a song, bro. Like, I was just like, what is he doing? 3 years later, when I listen to Ascension, I'm like, I can appreciate it for what it is. Very important to note, when I listened to Diaspora back in 2022, I was listening to it as a listener. Now I'm listening to it as a commentator. I'm listening to it as a hip-hop scholar, right? I'm listening to it as Unc. I'm listening to it as a person that does Wild Take Wednesdays. So I'm opened up to certain things now, and I'm like, oh no, Ascension is very important, right? Because it has a purpose to the narrative. Ascension has a purpose to the narrative. I still say here, Ascension still expands on the Victorian or Greco-Roman tragedy of our lives. Marcus Aurelius, Gladiator. If you listen to Ascension, we fight to ascend for survival, because our lives is a battle, right? He says something here. He's like, there's a line that he says on Ascension where he says, "What's a king to a god? Kel El Zod," right? If you listen, or if you know rather, the reference of Kal El and General Zod, Superman, what's a king to a god? You understand? The juxtaposition of good and evil, the juxtaposition of, right, what is a king to a god? The Jay-Z, the Frank Ocean line of No Church in the Wild, but that line carries even further, right? So he says, what's a king to a god? Kal El Zod, right? And then he goes into a bunch of other metaphors just to show that we are here to battle. You understand? So we are here to battle to ascend. So when you listen to Ascension right after Glacier, it still stays in that. Don't forget, right, Greco-Roman times, don't forget Victorian times, we had the kings and the queens and the royals, right? That's Glacier. And then we had the soldiers. That's Ascension. So when you look at it, right, it gives you the perspective of the person that's looking down and watching the fighters fight for their ascension. Again, I wrote here, Marcus Aurelius, Gladiator, right? You looking at it. That's you on Glacier. That's the perspective that you get on Glacier. And then from Glacier, right, to Ascension, it changes. Now you the gladiator. You're the gladiator looking at everybody looking at you, and you're trying to prove to yourself, right, and to everybody else that I will survive. I will survive, right? So we move from that. Again, memoirs, right? The environment we find ourselves in. Dor tu povo, the emotional state we find ourselves in, right? Glacier, the dreams and the aspirations that we are trying to unearth, right? Within this environment, within this broken environment that we find ourselves in, right? Ascension, we are willing to fight. We are willing to fight to make sure that these dreams and aspirations that we have in this broken environment that breeds pain for us, we are willing to fight to make these things come to fruition or come to life. Then we go to running off the bulls, I believe is the name of the song, featuring 25K. Again, the dark side of the diaspora that is the hood, right? We just come from, oh, I'm willing to fight. I'm willing to fight to get to where I need to take it. I'm willing to, right? I don't care. Because I'm trying to be as cold as the jewelry that I wear. So I don't care. I'm going to fight. I'm going to ascend in this environment that breeds pain, right? So I just gave you the whole psychological, emotional, right, and maybe financial, physical, whatever you want to call it, right, perspective of this character that's in this diaspora. Now let me show you what we really do. Right, I write here on Running of the Bulls, the darker side of the diaspora being the hood, the aggression, the anger of the displacement, finding life in a place that you are not supposed to breed hope. It creates chaos. You understand? Because you are not living to your full potential. Right. If you listen to Running of the Bulls, the stories that 25K, talks about, right? The stories that Maglera himself talks about. You understand? He talks about how, I won't say the line exactly, but he talks about how, right, as children, if you live in the hood, right, as children back in the early 2000s, if you born in the late 90s, you used to fetch bottles. You used to fetch bottles, take them to the recycling place, or take them to the guy that works at the recycling place that buy you sweets. You understand? That taught you what arbitrage. That taught you hustle. So if I spend all my time in the rubbish bin, right, or there by the rubbish dump, and I fetch enough bottles, I can turn these bottles into money. You get addicted to the money. You understand what the money does for you. You understand what the money does for your people. It changes your whole perspective. Now you learn that there's hustling involved, right? One of my favorite lines, which is funny, but it shows the level of anger and aggression on and it's very vulgar, right? On Running of the Bulls, he says, my friend go so I told him Salabenchu. It just goes to show, right, like the level of aggression that we have, right, within this place of brokenness. We are willing to even spew it on somebody else. My friend go so I told him fella Salabenchu. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it's like the level of disregard, right? Like, bro, I'm out here trying to figure it out. It's like I'm a sahiphop. You understand? Like, you're on bullshit, bro. I'm trying to figure this thing out. What are you on? You understand? Like, I'm a bull. I'm running with other bulls. We gotta go get it. We gotta go get it. Why? Because we are ascending. We are trying to ascend to where we need to get to, right? Because we're trying to live this life with the glaciers. Because this pain that we find ourselves in this broken environment, Dor tu povo memoirs, right? It's not gonna cut it for me. So I'm gonna run. And I know I'm not living to my full potential because this place is supposed to breed chaos. I'm going to live within this chaos, and I'm going to turn this chaos into something. We are really, Jay-Z talks about it on, I believe, it's on Reasonable Doubt. I think it's The Evils. You understand? If it's not The Evils, I forgot the name. Maybe it's Can I Live, where he says, he says something along the lines where he says 9 to 5 is how you survive. I ain't trying to survive. I'm trying to live it to the limit and love it alive, right? Like I'm trying to go get it whichever way, right? I'm trying to go get it whichever way. Whichever way, bro. I'm not willing to. I'm a bull, and I'm running with other bulls to go figure it out, right? Cool. That's Running with the Bulls. Then we go into my other favorite song. I think on this album I have 4 favorite songs. All right. Dortupovo being one of them, or three. Dortupovo being one of them, Makazana being the second, right? Everyone knows Makazana. It was one of the popular singles off of the album, right? Magazana right here, hope in the chaos. Now let's break down Magazana. Contextually, let's understand where Maglera Doe comes from. Maglera Doe comes from Kanana in Klerksdorp in the northwest, right? I believe before Klerksdorp became part of the northwest, Klerksdorp was the last townships or the last places in Gauteng, right? You have Klerksdorp. I think you have Klerksdorp, then you have the Vaal, or you have the Vaal, and then you have Klerksdorp. I can't remember, right, which one comes first. But I know it's Klerksdorp, the Vaal, Carletonville, Randfontein, you understand, Krugersdorp, Kagiso, right, Randfontein, Mutlakeng, Krugersdorp, Kagiso, right, those places, right, like Randfontein, Krugersdorp, Carletonville, right, Western area, Bekkersdal, right, Vaal, Klerksdorp. Right, those places, I look at those places as like cousins of one another because the townships are very similar, the people are very similar, right? These are people that come from the northwest, also known as Buputatswana, or formerly known as Buputatswana. They come down to come look for jobs, or some of them are displaced after Buputatswana was disbanded. So contextually, you need to understand where Maglera Doe comes from. Right, those people, these are, some of them are majority Tswana people, but some of them are also Sotho people, right? When Magazana starts, he starts by mimicking a radio intro. You understand? You now listening to the township, right? He goes into it, Magwenya. I can't remember what he says now, but he says something about, he kind of paints the environment. You understand? Magwenya etsaenge dincha dia bogolo dia hubula, you understand, like he starts painting this environment, but he paints it from a perspective of a radio broadcaster. Why is that important? Now, context. I gave you context, the type of people that exist in these places that Maglera found himself in. Like I said, Klerksdorp, Carletonville, Vaal, Randfontein, Bekkersdal, Western area, Kagiso, Krugersdorp. These are the places that he may have, frequented. You understand? I also come from these places, by the way. Right? So his lifestyle is not far removed from my lifestyle. Obviously, certain hoods are more dangerous than others, but again, we're the same people, right? I need you to understand why this is important. All right, here, Makazana. Motsweding and Lesedi FM or Lesedi FM kept us alive because it was the only reference we had to our homeland. Right? If you grew up in these places in a Tswana or Sotho family, you know in your childhood that Motsweding FM was always there. It was always on. Lesedi FM was always there. It was always on. Right? Your childhood is riddled with moments where these two radio stations was always on. These radio stations were the only things that kept our grandmothers and our grandfathers and our mothers and our fathers attached to the homelands that they were forcefully removed in this diasporic system that we call the township. So when Maglera Doe starts the song and says, "You are now listening to the township," and then he explains the township, right, in this radio-esque way, right, it also gives you, right, a reference, a contextual reference, because this is what we did. This is how we grew up. We listened to these things. You understand what I'm saying? Right? These radio stations and these shows, you understand, people like Wontate Tuso, you understand, these people were always Ntate Maine. These people were always around us, Twasa. These people were always around us. So when you listen to Makazana, the opening of it references that. It brings you back to the essence of the hood, the essence of this diasporic system that we are forced in. But while doing that, it also gives you hope in this chaotic space that you are in, right? Again, Motsweding and Lesedi FM kept us alive because it was the only reference we had to our homeland, right? So now, when you walk into the song, and then he starts by greeting you. We are in this chaotic space, but we have to acknowledge each other for who we are. People. Ache dumela, how you doing vandaag? Moma Kazana, land of Italy. Yeah, that now he goes into it. You understand? He breaks it down to you. Like, okay, this is what the hood is. You understand? With that being said, the juxtaposition also comes in. You remember I said rappers like Maglera, Pretty Ugly, and them, they use juxtaposition very well, right? Very, very well. On this here song, he uses the juxtaposition of hope and chaos. He says, there's a part where he says, hold me a shaman, other hold me a prophet, made in his image. Does that mean I am God? You understand? That line, to me, it speaks to this. When you're in chaos, you're not even supposed to believe in anything, because that chaos, right, when you believe in something, that means you can see ahead. There's foresight. If you believe in a God, that means you have foresight of positivity. Whether the belief is contrived through a religious system, whatever the case may be, your mind is telling you that there will be better days. You are forecasting better days. Even though you're in this chaos, you are forecasting hope. Excuse me. So when he mentions the shaman and the prophet, I'm made in his image, does that mean I am God? It speaks to that also, that even in this chaos, there are people, custodians of spirituality, custodians of faith, custodians of hope that we live amongst, right? While we are doing that, he comes back and says, before rather I say that line, while we are doing that, right, it gives us also an understanding that in as much as there's God here, in as much as there's light here, we are still in this dark place that causes identity crisis. Because why are we here? Who are we? Where do we come from? We got removed from where we come from. So who are we really? Who are you? What do you do? What are you here for? Made in his image, does that mean I am God? Oh, okay, so there is light in me. Okay. But if there's light in me, why do I find myself in this darkness? Then he expands on the darkness. There's another line where he says, homie a crook, other cousin a cop. He doesn't live by the book, right? He grew up on the block. La bodega was hot. Rotana Ramushaba. La bodega was hot. Took the koniga shafa. Right? Again, the juxtaposition of, oh, there's such an identity crisis here that there's a bro who's a crook. He's a crook because he essentially found himself in this space and lived in the space as the thing that the space wanted to create, a crook. Right? He succumbed to the darkness. However, there are other people who are trying to get out. So he's a copper, right? Or he's a cop. But he doesn't live by the book because he grew up on the block. So the traces of that darkness is still in him, right? Even though he's trying to be a better citizen by being a cop, right? To police us and police whatever nonsense that's happening in this environment, right? And then he goes back, he says, La bodega was hot. Rota na ramuhlaba. La bodega was hot. Took the koniga shaf. In this space of darkness where we're supposed to eradicate each other, we can still see each other as human beings. Achetu melam. How you doing, vandaag? The acknowledgement that he gave you in the first opening of the line comes back now in the second verse, right? And he says, oh no, we can see we are trying to eradicate each other. But because we see each other as human beings nonetheless, we will try preserve life to the best of our ability. Even though it requires me because I want to. You understand what I'm saying? I'd rather preserve this thing, this human being thing, right? By taking this weapon and hiding it, right? We are preserving life in this space that we're supposed to essentially perish in. The juxtaposition of the hood, right? Makazana, hope in the chaos. Hope in the chaos. Hope in the chaos. He goes on the same song by asking questions like, why do we do this to each other, and so on and so forth. But it's very important to note, diaspora, this diasporic system that we find ourselves in the hood, right? Because we were removed forcefully from our homelands, has created these crazy dynamics that we find ourselves in. But we can still remember who we are, being human, through the grace of God. Through the grace of God, we can still remember who we are. Right? Cool. Then, on top of that, after Makazana, he goes into Goni. Again, Goni, I didn't like it. Right? 2022, I didn't like it. But in 2025, after explaining Makazana, I understand why Goni comes in next. Goni is an expansion of the darker side of the diaspora being the hood. It further expands why things are the way that they are. Right? Especially on the first verse. On the first verse, it's just an extension, right, of what he was talking about on Makazana, which is, this is where we find ourselves. These are the dynamics. As you are realizing, as you listen to this album, you realize, right, that with every song, he just becomes more granular when he explains the dynamics of the hood, right? He also becomes more granular when he explains why, right, we find ourselves here. And on Goni, he does that very well. On the second verse of Goni, he just does the rapper thing of, hey, I am here, right? Of which I appreciated. That's the first time he kind of steps away from the narrative of diaspora and says, hey, me as Maglera Doe boy, I'm coming, right? And he explains it very well on the second verse. And then the album takes a positive turn, but a very interesting turn. Again, if you haven't listened to the album, I would implore you to go listen to the album. The album takes a turn, a very positive turn. The aspirations of the children that grew up in the hood, the children of the hood. The album, when it takes a turn by showing you, the album opens you up to what the hood is, this diasporic system that we call the township, right? It opens you up to the dynamics of that. It opens you up to the different personalities. It opens you up to the different the different ways we relate to each other, right? And then, however, while it does that, it also tells you that we want to be something bigger than what we are. After Goni, it switches. After Goni, it switches, right? There's something that I'm going to mention. Or rather, before I mention it, I'm always going to mention this one character. And I'll come back and explain why this character is so important in as far as this album. So the next song after Goni is Banyana. Right? On Banyana, I say this should have been the third single. Fine. Because we see each other as human beings, we have the capacity to love. And because we have the capacity to love, it gives us the capacity to see each other as human beings also, right? But also see ourselves as human beings and also believe in ourselves. Because if you can love someone, right, and see good in them and see hope for them, you can also see it yourself, right? Love is a reflection. If I can love you, that means I can love myself. And essentially, when I love you, I learn to love myself and vice versa. And on Banyana, we see that. You understand? Because Banyana now comes in the form of him expressing to a woman, hey, this is how I feel. You understand? But when he expresses that, he does it in a way that also reflects to him. Right? Grootman Cageism from Marafe is featured on the song. Right? The end of the song, you hear a voice note of him and Focalistic talking. And Focalistic mentions that, hey, my brother, we essentially birds of the same feather, we flock together. We come from the same place and we fighting for the same for the same thing, right? Which is the aspiration that we find or that we hear on Glacier, right? We fight for the ascension, right? That we hear on Ascension. The next song after Banyana, we hear Maglera House Party. I wrote here, Focalistic's verse damages me. The beat damages me. On Maglera House Party, these are now boys from the hood. Excuse me. Or boys in the hood. Excuse me. They just left the hood now. They're enjoying the fruits of fighting and ascending. Right? They enjoying the fruits of fighting and ascending, right? The fruits, now they with the glaciers. They cold, right? And not in a negative way, in a positive way. Because the ice is booming, right? The woman is booming, right? They sipping on something on the rocks. It's a beautiful time, right? They're enjoying the hard work, right, of existing outside of the chaos that they found themselves in, that they were born in, right? Again, cageism is featured on this, the same way he was featured on Banyana. So now he's featured on 2 songs back to back, right? Again, Banyana, I'm opening myself up to you, right? I'm opening myself up to you. If I open myself up to you, I can reflect back to myself and I can learn to love myself while I love you. In doing that, I can only do that if I'm outside of the chaos that I'm in, right? Or that I find myself in. Guess what? I am outside of the chaos. I fought. I ascended. I'm with my bro. Focalistic. We enjoy. But at every step of the way, I'm always with cageism. From Banyana to Maglera Doe to Maglera House Party. And then the thingy, the Sun song. Right? I wrote here, the Sun song is basking in the aspiration, but being aware of the pain of where we come from. Right? When you listen to the Sun song, I think it starts with a voice note of his nephew. Right? I believe. And the Sun song is this song where he's really belting. He's really like crooning. He's really just like giving himself to the moment. Right? He's giving himself to the moment in as far as understanding that I may have made it, but I'm not there yet. Right? And in as much as I'm not there yet, I can sit here and let the sun, like bask in the sun, bask in the aspiration. But I always have to remember where I come from. Right? Then we go to the next song, God is a Black Woman. From the Sun song, we go into God is a Black Woman. I wrote here again, featuring cageism. I wrote here, God is a Black Woman is not just a love song, but is an ode to the backbone of making this hopeless place a home that breeds unlimited hope. What do I mean by that? When we go back to Dust, I mentioned on last week's Wild Take Wednesday that Pretty Ugly writes from the perspective of mothers, more so than anything. In his writing, he always looks for the mother, right? And the mother's perspective, or the mother's emotional placement, right? The situation. What does the mother feel about the situation? Because essentially, our mothers are the backbone of hope in this hopeless place. God as a Woman is an ode to that. It is an ode to the backbone of making this hopeless place a home that breeds unlimited hope. And when you listen to God as a Woman, he's not just talking to a woman that he's in love with, but he's talking to all women. Women that help us move forward. Women that help us build. Women that remind us to love. Women that remind us we are human. Women that remind us that in as much as we are living this rat race, it is also life that deserves to be lived. Women that remind us that we are God's children. Cageism is featured on this again. So cageism is featured on Banyana Maglera Doe Party or Maglera House Party. I believe he's also featured on the Sun song. And then he's featured on God is a Black Woman. So these are 4 songs. Don't forget. So this part of the album, I call it the aspiration of the hood children, or the children of the hood. Right? From Banyana to Maglera House Party to the Sun song to God is a Woman. I call it the aspiration of the children of the hood because this is where you hear a different narrative from what we heard prior. Right? It speaks also of the Eve gene, yes. Right? Towards the end of the song, there's a clip that speaks of the Eve gene. or the beginning of the song. I can't remember. Right. Or rather, I think it's the end of the Sun song. There's a clip of the Eve Jean, and then God is a Black Woman comes in. I can't remember now the placement of that clip. Ladies and gentlemen, after God is a Black Woman, we go into probably the most important song on this whole album, in my opinion. One of the greatest songs ever written, I believe. One of the most important songs in my life, personally. This song reminded me what I needed to do. This song reminded me who I am. This song reminded me what I needed to partake in when this life becomes very hard. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the last song of the album. The name of the song is called Thapelo. I played it earlier on. On Thapelo, it is the most important song of the album because what Thapelo does, as what Memoirs does, is that it shows the juxtaposition of we find ourselves in this darkness, but at the end of the day, we have God. When I played Thapelo earlier on, you heard that this is a prayer. That's all that Thapelo is, a prayer, right? And a multi-layered prayer that speaks of religious doctrine, African spirituality, and the likes. It's a prayer to God. It is a wrap-up of the human essence. It is hope. When you listen to Thapelo, no matter what you go through, no matter what you are going through, no matter what you lost, I believe when you listen to Thapelo, it reminds you that God is the only way. Prayer is the only way. And in this diasporic system that we find ourselves in called the township, the only thing that allowed us to live, allowed us to dream, allowed us to aspire, allowed us to achieve, allowed us to survive, allowed us to ascend, allowed us to love is God. And that's why he ends the album with a prayer. Cageism is featured on this song also. Closes it very beautifully. Now, the reason why I had to mention Cageism's involvement in the second part of the album is I believe Cageism, his character plays an older brother figure that helps you walk through this process of aspiration without losing yourself to it. I wrote here, having Cageism play the older brother figure is important because he made it out first. He's the first to make it out of this diasporic system that we call the hood. And if we look just historically, right, Maglera Doe is signed to Kulichana's label. So when you look at Kulichana made it through Morafe, Cageism, Morafe, they're the first ones to make it out. So the second generation needs an older brother. The older brother is Cooley, but in the album's context, the older brother is Cageism. Cageism is always walking with him. Even if he's not there physically, it's always walking with him. He's the big homie. He's the older brother, right? He's the voice of reason. Hey, remember where we come from. Don't let this thing break you. Don't let this thing take you to places that you don't want to. And matter of fact, remember to pray, right? There's a line on Thapelo. I posted it on the story earlier today. It says something, I'm not going to say the line exactly because I don't want to chop it, but it says something about always pray because the ones that came before you left the messages in the prayer. Always pray because the ones that came before you, the ones that walked this road, right, left you a guide on how to survive outside of this thing in the prayer. So no matter what happens, always remember, pray. And again, going back to God as a Black woman, it being an ode to the backbone of the backbone of making this hopeless place a home, right? A home that breeds, unlimited hope, right? He mentions how before anything else, his mother taught him to pray, and his mother told him to pray. When I first heard Thapelo, I listened to Thapelo on repeat for a good 2-3 months. Thapelo was my alarm. Tapelo was the first song I listened to when I was running. Tapelo was the song that always reminded me where I needed to take it. And when you listen to Maglera Doe's album, what it teaches you or what it brings forth to you is, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, no matter where you find yourself, the human experience remains the human experience. And the only thing that governs the human experience is God. So even in this diasporic system that we find ourselves in called the township, right, or whatever financial position you find yourself in, right, dire financial strains or stress because of you find yourself being resourceful but not knowing how to move around, you can always go back to God, because at the end of the day, we find ourselves in this broken environment through memoirs. We explain our pain through Dor tu Povo, right? We explain our pain through Dor tu Povo. We explain our ambition through Glacier. We explain our fight, our will through Ascension. We explain why we do what we do through Raging, or Running of the Bulls rather. We explain also the hope that we find in this treacherous place, right, in Makazana. We explain, right, that even though we're in this treacherous place, there is still some fuck shit happening in Goni, but at the end of the day, we will make it out, and we will experience each other as human beings, man and woman, on Banyana. We will experience each other as brothers on Maglera House Party. We will experience ourselves, right, outside of this chaotic place as human beings on Sun Song. We will go back and give ode to the ones that allowed us to be who we are, which is our mothers and the women that love us on God as a Woman. And we will give the final ode to the only person, if you think God is a person, the only entity, the only omnipotent figure, which is God. I believe diaspora is one of the best anthropological, sociological, psychological, any logical thing that you can find. It's one of the best writings. I think Diaspora is the best album to ever come out in the 2020s in SA hip hop, because it's not meant for you to dance only, but it's meant for you to really look at yourself and understand the human experience. I believe Diaspora is written by a human being who understands the human experience and is giving it to you. I think his second album is going to be called The Adam Theory, right? And I believe it will piggyback on this whole, spiritual too, yes. It will piggyback on or further expand on the human experience. And I believe Maglera Doe gave us one of the best albums, if not the best albums in SA hip hop. And yeah, go listen to Diaspora. Diaspora by Maglera Doe came out 2022. One of the best albums to ever drop, in my opinion. And yeah, go listen to Diaspora. And that's my review, ladies and gentlemen, of Diaspora. I don't have the bull right here, but that's definitely Diaspora from my perspective, right here on Wild Take Wednesdays. Go listen to Diaspora, please.